It's been a great conference so far, has it? Yeah? It seems a shame to spoil that for you now, but I'm about to start. So I've got 3 kids, and my kids cannot, for the life of them, understand why I would stand on a stage and talk to a whole load of people. So what I like to do is I'd just like to take a picture of the audience to show my kids. Don't worry, it won't go on social media, okay? So I'm going to count to 3, if you can all sort of just squeeze in a little bit. And I'm going to count to 3, and then when I get to 3, if we all say, works on my machine, okay? And I'll take a picture. Is everyone ready? Okay, yep. Okay, nice big smiles. Okay, 1, 2, 3, works on my machine. Glorious, fabulous, thank you very much. Okay, so I'm here today to talk to you about how to thrive in your career as a tester. And to start, I have to really go back to probably around 15 years ago when I first entered the industry. I was clearly a lot slimmer, a lot younger. I had a little bit more hair, if you can believe that. And I'd started going to conferences. And I went to my first testing conference, and it was okay. You know, it was all right. It was fine. It wasn't a problem at all. Until I met Mr. Freaking Furious. Now, this guy was a tester, okay? And we were at the networking party. And by the way, have you ever been to a tester's networking event? Awkward, okay? And I was stood there mingling, talking to people, like, how are you? Yes, great. And Mr. Freaking Furious clearly thought that I looked too happy. So he stormed over to me and he pinned me to the wall with his anger and his fury. He hated testing. He hated the industry that he was in. He hated his company. And I can guarantee you that his company probably hated him too. He hated me, clearly. And I guarantee that if you were there, he would hate you as well. He hated what he had become. And I left that networking event that evening and I went home crying and I swore I would never, ever become Mr. Freaking Furious. Now, don't be surprised, there are a lot of these people in our community. And then a second compelling event happened about 5 years later. My first son was born. This is Oliver. We're lucky to have Ollie. He was born with a knot in his umbilical cord, and that normally ends in disaster. So we were lucky. This is him. He's now 11. Okay, that shows you how old I am. And I was overwhelmed with what you call the baby effect, when you have that first child and suddenly you're like, oh my God, this thing relies on me and I'm playing video games all day and I'm just spending money on nonsense and shopping at the weekend. And now I have to look after myself. I have to provide for this child. And I've had another 2 children since then, and it gets worse with each one. And so I started thinking, what have I got to do to remain relevant? To put a roof over this child's head, to look after this child, to be a role model for my sons so they can grow up to be the men that I want them to become. And so after an awkward evening cuddling him after he was quite ill one night, I remembered back to Mr. Freaking Furious. And what was really terrifying was I was starting to see elements of Mr. Freaking Furious in myself. I was jaded, I was tired, I was fed up with the industry. And that night, I grabbed a sheet of A4 paper, I wrote my name across the top, and I listed 35 different things that I wanted to achieve in my life. And I'm still today working that list. And losing weight is one of them. So this is what's worked for me, and I'm going to share with you the 10 things that through my career, going from a tester to an engineering manager running a really, really high-performing agile team, to then taking a sidestep to become a vice president in HR, to then running my own consultancy company, to writing books, to blogging, to speaking here on stage. Believe it or not, 15 years ago, I would never, ever do a presentation. Okay? And all of these things were on my list, and there's still a ton more that I haven't quite got to. So I'm going to share with you the 10 very simple ideas to thrive in your career. Now, I must add, these are my ideas. You can have them, you can steal them, you can plagiarize them, you can hate on them if you wish. Okay? But they have worked for me. Okay? But the other way will also work. There will be people doing the opposite to this and being successful. So use them as you see fit. Are we ready for this then? Yeah? Cool. It's a quiet audience this morning. Hungover? That's it. Okay, so the first thing you have to do to thrive in your career is actually make a decision to do it. That happened on that night with my son, thinking back to Mr. Freak and Furious, I made a decision that I was no longer going to be working in the environments that were draining me of my interest and enthusiasm. If you imagine your life as an hourglass, the stuff at the bottom, the sand at the bottom is time that has passed. There is nothing you can do about that. It's gone, it's passed, it's disappeared. If you imagine at the top is the future, that's what you've got to come yet. But the interesting thing is, imagine you can't see how much sand is in the top half of this. So you have no idea. A good friend of mine recently lost a very young child who, if you'd have asked, how long does that child have to live? Half a decade, half a century, who knows? I used to live next door to a lady called Irene who was Irish. And she smoked about 500 cigarettes a day. And every day for 5 to 10 years, she would say, I haven't got long left to live. And I thought, well, if you're going to smoke that much, I guarantee you haven't. But 10 years later, she was still alive, okay? You have no idea what the future holds. The only thing you do know is that it's constantly passing us by. The now is all there ever is. So you have to start now. With every choice, you create the life you'll live. With every decision, you design it. And I always encourage people to do what I did, which is to paint a picture. Now, you can do this in your work. You can paint a picture about how the future of your organization is going to look. And in that picture, paint it as well as you can. In my painted picture, I listed how much I wanted to be earning, where I wanted to live, what car I wanted to drive. I listed everything about the family, my life, me, who I was going to become. And I'm still working towards that painted picture today. And I encourage people to set goals. I encourage them to set a 10-year goal, which for me is that painted picture. And then I encourage people to set a 5-year goal, because the decisions you make today may not come to fruition for 3, 4, 5 years' time. And I encourage everybody that works with me to set a 1-year goal, because the absolute guaranteed fact is if you do nothing to change your career now, you will be in the same situation in 1 year's time. And trust me, the organizations that you work for do not have your best interests at heart. It is up to you to decide your future, not your manager, not the organization. If you live constantly allowing other people to design your life, do not be surprised when it turns out different to what you expected. Now, I left it too late. I had my first child when I was 30. He's 11 now, so you can work out how old I am. I left it too late. I spent my 20s playing video games, wasting life, okay? God, imagine what I could have achieved during those years. But I'm happy. I'm very happy with where I am. And by the way, people always say to me, how do you manage time? You don't. Time does not respond well to being managed. It just goes, okay? So, relationships are crucial. If you joined me on the nonverbal communication or the communications workshop, you'll know I'm a huge fan of talking about relationships. Relationships are how you thrive in your career. Okay, you've got 3 different ways to control power, and power is nothing more than just the ability to get things done. It's not about manipulation. It's not about directing people and organizing and all that sort of stuff. It is about getting things done. And there are 3 ways you can get things done in an organization. One of them is by using role power. Hands up if you're a manager. Okay, these people have role power. They manage other people. Hands up if you have a manager. Exactly. And that person, that manager, has role power over you. They can hire you. They can fire you. They can promote you. They can give you a pay rise. If you are using role power, use it as little as possible. It's a horrible thing to use, but sometimes you have to. Most of us don't have role power, so what else do we have? We are experts. Who in here is an expert in testing? A few, good. Not as many as I thought. And by the way, you have to be told you're an expert. You can't self-label yourself an expert. Have you seen that on LinkedIn? Expert this, expert that. it usually comes from someone else. Someone else says, oh, Rob is an expert. Great, cool, I like it. Okay, expertise power is brilliant. If you're the only person that knows how to do AI-driven test automation, which was fascinating talk yesterday, if you're the only person that knows how to do that, you're an expert. And you can go through your career being the expert because you have no competition. But at some point, you're going to be no longer the expert. And then what happens? The only way to get power in an organization, and every single one of you has this ability today, is through relationship power. You build relationships. You find out who is useful and who isn't, and you build relationships. If you want to move to a different department, you find the people who are running that department and you ask them, what problem can I help you solve? And you build a relationship. And if you're good at what you do, and you build strong, honest, real relationships, you will have no problem thriving in your career. And it was interesting to hear Tibor say that Lee Copeland suggested me for the talk. I didn't know that. It's great. I'll be sure to send Lee a message afterwards. Okay, that is relationship. There's nothing else there. Lee probably saw me at a talk. That is a relationship. Okay? And when we talk about politics in an organization, who works in an organization with politics? Everybody does. Because as soon as you have more than one person, you have politics. And politics are nothing more than relationships. And most of us don't realize that we have a great idea. We want to invest in this new technology, and we ask our manager, and our manager goes, fine, I'll go and take it to the executives or my management peers, and we'll see what happens. And the idea that you had, this utopian view of the way that you thought the world would go, comes back from the executives as like half as good. Have you ever had that? That is politics. Give, take, give, take. Okay, I will not spend as much on this, but I will help you with this, and in the future, you will help me when I need you. It's a relationship. That's how organizations work. The other thing is, in our connected world, we're very rarely more than 3 or 4 degrees away from each other. And if you are a horrible person to work with, you will not go far in your career. LinkedIn. The number of times I get a connection saying, oh, you used to work with X, would you hire them? I'm normally very positive, okay? But you must build relationships. It's how you go through. It's how you get opportunities. I was able to set up my own organization and move straight into work because I built relationships. They're how the world goes round. Okay, look at these 3. Don't these 3 look like they're having fun? Is this you at work? Do you look like that at work? Yes, a few. Who looks like this at work? 3 people. Brilliant. So I'm a big hip-hop fan. I know I don't look like I am the type to be into hip-hop, but I love it. It's a brilliant form of music, and there's a band called Flame Griller who are from my hometown, home county of Yorkshire in England, okay? And it's properly good hip-hop. And one of their tracks has the lyrics, if you're not having fun with it, be done with it. And it is something I have strived in my life to adhere to, okay? If you're really not having fun with it, I'm not suggesting that you have to have fun every day because that would be weird, okay? We have days where it's not so good, days where we feel good, days where we don't feel so good. But overall, if you're going to work and it is miserable most of the time, you are in the wrong job. And Mr. Freaking Furious had been at the same company for 15 years, and he hated it. Why was he still there? We can make a decision. It might be hard. You might have to wait. You might have to build enough money to make that risky decision. You might have to upskill. But what's the alternative? That you spend the rest of your career in jobs you don't enjoy? Work should be fun. And a true test for me when I'm building teams is, are my teams having fun? Are they laughing? Are they giggling? Are they enjoying each other's company? Because if they are, the chances are they're going to be okay. So remember this, if you're not having fun with it, be done with it. So moving on. Trade your freedoms wisely. This is something I see all the time in our technology world. I was at an event the other day and a developer said to me, I wish my business would just give me 6 months and I could go away and I would build them something really awesome. How many of you work for an organization that would let you do that? 3 or 4 people. You've made the best decision. Okay? But most of us don't work in those organizations. And I hear this all the time from technologists who are going, why do I have to do what product owner says? Why do management have to get involved? Why do I have to do this? Why can I not do that? You don't have to do anything. But when you join an organization, you join it for some benefits. A salary, employment, pension, the ability to do more than you can do on your own. But as soon as you walk through the door of an organization, you immediately trade some freedoms. The most obvious one, being able to stay in bed all day and watch Netflix. Other ones, you might work in a bank, in which case you might have to dress in a certain way that you don't feel comfortable with. That is a freedom that you trade when you join an organization. And the majority of people don't realize that they are trading these freedoms in return for working in that organization. So if the leadership of that organization ask a reasonable request of you, why is there so much pushback? I do a lot of agile transitions, and the number one reason most agile transitions fail is because the technologists are refusing to do what the organization has asked them to do. Now, put your hands up if you're an agile coach. Great, we've got 1 or 2. I worked with an organization. They spent in the region of 20+ million pounds trying to go agile. Why was this not working? They had the best of the best of the best trying to do this. And I spoke to one of the coaches, and he said, I'm trying to coach this team here that just won't do what we've asked them to do. How long have you been coaching this team? About 3 years. Wow. And they're still not doing what you've asked them to do? No. They refuse to do agile. And they are trying to coach their way around the belief that this team can do what they want. This is a management problem. Okay, so how do you solve that? You go in and you say, this is a reasonable request. We'd like you to go agile. This is how we'll help you, support you, coach you, be with you on this journey, but there is no alternative. You trade your freedoms when you join an organization. And we as technologists, we like our freedom. And if we like our freedom more than the ability to join an organization and get more done, then I suggest you set up your own company. You can do what you want. Okay? That makes sense? Good. Okay, so shipping value. If you want to thrive in your career, you need to understand what the business results are. When I ask most leaders, testers, developers, anybody, and I ask them, what is the business value? Most people cannot answer it. I'm a tester. I do testing. For what reason? And when you keep drilling into this and digging down, you need to get to the point of why is the organization paying you to do what you're doing? And if you can work that out and you know where that budget comes from, and believe me, most managers have no idea what their business results are expected to be either. But once you do get to somebody who actually knows what they're doing in your organization, build a relationship with them and add value to that person. Because the people who get promoted, the people who have a strong, healthy career in testing and development and anything, are the people who have worked out how to use their skills to add value to their organization. And people talk to me about productivity systems all the time, and a productivity system is really nothing more than 2 things. It is a container, and it has some rules. And the Agile community is obsessed with Kanban. It's a container, and it has some rules on how you do it. Or Scrum. It's a container, and it has some rules on how you do things. A simple to-do list is a container, and it has some rules. I do this, I do that. None of them is inherently better than any of the others. But the one that resonates with you and your team and allows you to ship value with the least amount of friction is the one you should go for. And if you've designed this productivity system and at the end it looks a little bit like SAFe, God forbid, or it looks a little bit like Scrum or Kanban or Agile or Waterfall, fine. But don't start with the productivity tool in mind. Build your own. So, I'm going to spend a bit more time on this section here. So who was in the communications workshops that I ran the other day? Cool. So we're going to cover some ground here. So one of the most effective ways I've found to thrive in my career is to embrace the differences that we all have in our organizations. We're all good at some things, and we all have inherent weaknesses. Now, what I encourage you to do is 3 things, and you can find this. I'll send the link to Tibor and the team, and you can find a download that you can have that allows you to fill this in and work out what you're good at. So the first thing is, most of us have absolutely no idea what our strengths are. If I was to ask you what you're good at, would you be able to give me an answer, a specific answer? So most people say, I'm good at testing. Who in here is good at testing? Yeah. Really? Not that many? This is shameful. Should we try that one again? Who in here is actually quite good at testing? Good. Yeah. We've even got the Agile coach who's saying he's good at testing. This is excellent. Okay, so that's a strength. But what is testing? You know, when it comes down to it, what are you actually really good at? Because testing is a very diverse and a very broad term to use for things that we do at work. So what I would encourage you to do, and the one that I like, is to use the Strengths Finder 2.0 by Gallup. It's not massively scientific, but it's helpful. It's an indicator. You buy the book, throw the book away. You get the code, you go to the website, you sit a series of tests, and at the end of it, it will tell you what your top 5 strengths are. And at the bottom, obviously, it will tell you what you're not so good at. And from there, it'll also give you suggestions of what career path you can follow. So when I was jaded with testing, when I became an engineering manager, it became a bit more exciting. I was scaling 100% year on year in a startup. It was fabulous fun. And then again, I plateaued in my career, and I got deeply, deeply unhappy. And I did the Strengths Finder, and I realized that my strengths were not at all being used in that job. Okay? So I made a decision to do something else. It's a really interesting exercise because most of us have zero knowledge of what we're good at or what we're bad at. And most managers have no idea what you're good at or what you're bad at because they haven't spent the time to build a relationship with you. So my job as a manager is to make sure that if you're good at strategy, you're doing strategy. If you're good at testing detail, you're doing testing detail. We cannot all be good at the same thing. So that's really helpful, that one. The second one is DISC profile. You may have heard people talking about this at this event. I like this. Again, it's not 100% accurate, but it's indicative enough to be helpful. And when you sit it, you work out whether you're a D, an I, an S, or a C, or a combination of all of them, and it's helpful. And this is about preferences for behaviors at work. Because your behaviors at work are your company culture. And when I go in to do a transition for company culture transition stuff, people go, well, how do we change the culture? You change the culture of an organization by changing the behaviors. If everybody shouts at everybody, you have a culture of aggression and shoutiness. So how do you change it? You stop people shouting at each other. And the DISC profile is a very helpful way to work out how you can start communicating with people who are different to you. I used to have an executive boss once who was a high D, which stands for dominating. They're assertive. They're task-focused. I'm a high I, which means I'm an influential, jester kind of person, but I don't like detail. Okay? I'm a people-focused person. I'm assertive, which is good. But when it comes to detail, I struggle. I still don't know how I managed to be a reasonably good tester for so long. Okay? But when I went in to speak to my boss, who's a high D, assertive, task-focused, I'm a high I, assertive, people-focused, I would always go in and go, how are the kids? Did you have a good weekend? Are you all right? This is cool, great. And he just, no, stop. What do you want? And I would leave the room, God, rejected. Okay, why didn't he want to talk about my kids or his kids? That was just rude, yeah? He wasn't being rude. He was just being him. When you got him in a social event, he was fine. But at work, task-focused, assertive. The D, the I, the S is where you find most people in our Agile community, Scrum Masters. It stands for steadiness. And if you've ever seen a group of Scrum Masters come together to make a decision, it is painful. Okay, these people are passive and people-focused. Is everyone all right? Are we all agreed with this? Should we do some more dot voting on this? You know, are we all good? Is everyone, are you sure? Oh, I think we've got some discord here. I think we should just go and have another session. Painful to watch, but helpful in teams that have discord. And then you've got C's, which is generally, when I run these workshops, is where you find most engineers, developers, highly technical testers. It's conscientious. People like rules. They're passive, task-focused. And this is why Agile transitions don't work. I don't care about any of that people stuff and meetings. I just want to write code. Do you ever have that? Just let me write the code. But the Scrum Masters, no, we've all got to agree that that's the right code. And then the influencers are sat there going, come on, we can do this Agile transition. And the high Ds are like, for goodness sake, will somebody just do something? And then you wonder why, as teams and collectives of individuals will come together, we have problems. This is helpful. DISC can help you learn how to communicate with people who are different to you. And sadly, in our industry, particularly in the technology field at the moment, we seem to want to push people to be entrepreneurs, to be outgoing, to be assertive, to stand up on stage and talk to people. And the reality is at least half of us would find that frighteningly, terrifyingly awful. I mean, would anybody in here want to stand up on stage and do this? A few people, but not many. And yet we try to push people into these molds. We must be empathetic. Well, I'm sorry, but not everybody knows how to do that. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do the things that other people do. Like, I wish I was more task-focused. When I do my accounts on a Friday, it's the horrific hour of my week where I have to sit down and look at a spreadsheet. And it's got numbers and calculations, and it drives me mad. But I can do it. It just uses more energy. And it's not what I want to be doing all day, every day. And then the third one, Martin Seligman is a behavioral psychologist. And he wanted to know why people were happy. Because most psychologists focus on why we are sad. Why are we unhappy? And he said, well, we have these people who are actually happy. What are they doing that these people aren't doing? And he wrote a really good book called Authentic Happiness. And there's now an online assessment that you can do, and this is probably the most rigorous of the three. And it's 140-odd questions. If you've got to spare half an hour of your life, I suggest you sit it. Because at the end of that, you will have the top 5 things that you need in your life to be happy. And that is powerful. So if you have the 3 things together, you have what you're good at, how you prefer to work, your behavioral preferences, and then you have the things that make you happy. You have a beautiful career map for yourself. Your job in life is to align as much of those 3 as you possibly can. And my job as a manager when I'm managing teams is to align what you're good at, how you prefer to work, but I can't help you always with the happiness. And put your hand up genuinely if you are or you know somebody who is super, super happy at work. I know a few. They've hit gold. If that's not you, you need to do some work. Okay? This is super helpful, hopefully. Only you can be the judge of that. Okay. So, we must keep learning. This is how you thrive in your career. So people say to me, if you hated doing talks, why do you now stand on stage and do talks? And I still don't really know. I know why I got into it, but I don't really know quite why I do it. Because if you saw me before the talk, I am a bag of nerves. It's horrific. And I sit there and I say to people earlier, I was like, why do I do this? God, why do I do this? And then when I hit the stage, I'm fine. And then when I finish, I'm like, yeah, when's the next talk? And then the misery cycle starts again. But I did it the first conference because I wanted to go to the conference. And my business would not pay for it. And it was an expensive conference. And the best way to get to a conference is to speak at it. You get a free ticket, you sometimes get your flights and your hotel, etc. So I submitted to the conference. And then I got that miserable email that came through that said, you have been accepted. Speaker's remorse, I call it. And I spent a good month going, why am I doing this? Should I cancel? What am I doing? And then I realized I'd studied communication for years. I knew how to do stuff, I just never did it. So I learned how to do it. And my first talk was awful. And my second one was pretty miserable too. And actually, sometimes now there's still really poor talks. And hopefully you'll be the judge of today, and fingers crossed the feedback might be positive. But I do it to learn. And the more I do talks, the easier they become. The more I do anything, the easier it becomes. I wanted to learn a language, so you have to learn the language. If you want to decide to thrive in your career, you need to know where you are and where you're going to, and the gap in between is your learning path. And don't worry about making mistakes, because mistakes are a brilliant opportunity to learn. And in an organization, if you work in an organization where mistakes are a witch hunt, where mistakes get you into serious trouble, you need to find a different organization. Because a mistake is nothing more than we expected this and this happened. And the gap between those two things is your learning path. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to get really, really good at studying and learning. Go all the way back to when you were at school or college or university and continue to use the systems that work for you. We call this in the industry the personal knowledge management system. And you should all be really good at this. And I define 4 stages for that. The first one is capture. The world of the web has made it super easy to be inundated with knowledge and information. So you have to have a way of being able to capture that. And the second bit is then you need to be able to curate it, because there's just too much stuff. Have you ever had that where you go on the internet and you realize how stupid you are because there's so much stuff and you just end up swamped? So you need to curate it. Then you need to crunch it. You need to study it and understand it. It's not enough to have a website that you've taken from the web, curated it and said, this is interesting, and then do nothing with it. It's just information. People often describe knowledge as information in action. So that's the crunch bit. And then for me, I personally have this desire to then contribute that back into either my organization, to my kids, to the community as a whole, or just out there on the web of here's something I have learned. This is what I've tried to do. I've used it, and this is my interpretation of it. Loads of tools for this. Don't go crazy. It could even just be a notebook, okay? But I personally use Devon Think. If you're interested, it's like an alternative to Evernote, but it's on steroids. It is incredible. And then learn topics and subjects you enjoy. So my eldest kid, Ollie, is 11. He's now deciding on a secondary school. And thankfully and luckily, we live in a part of the country where we have 2 pretty good schools to send him to. And one is far more academic and sporty, and then the other one's more IT, sort of languages, humanities, that sort of stuff. And we're having this horrible dilemma where he's not sure which one to go to. Some of his friends are going to one, some are going to the other. And I said to him, you need to sit down and write down the topics that you really, really enjoy. And then you can start to make an informed decision. Because nothing will destroy your interest in a subject and learning and thriving in your career more than a subject you're studying that you absolutely hate. And when I go into test teams, the usual thing I see is testers trying to learn Python. How many people in here are trying to learn Python? Come on, be honest. Or Java, or C#, anything, okay? I went into a team, there were 10 testers, and they were all utterly miserable, apart from one. Theo, his name was. And they were all trying to learn Python. Why? Because the industry is saying to testers, that unless you are technical, you have no future. In this organization, the executives had stood up and said, there is no place for manual testing. We're only going to employ SDETs. And so the testers were furiously trying to learn Python. And in every single session, the developer running the session would be infuriated by the fact he had to go right back to the very beginning again, because 9 of them had no idea what they were doing. And why did they have no idea what they were doing? Because they didn't want to learn Python. They were doing it because they felt they had to. And what we're seeing now in the UK particularly is we are actually now starting to see, I guess, people from my generation coming through and then the next generation coming through into leadership and management positions where we know that you cannot solve every problem with test automation. And so we hire people for what they are good at. We need fewer testers, but the testers that we hire are insanely good. And we do not force somebody who is not built or designed to write code to write code. Because those that are built and designed to write code will probably be already doing it. And we face this in our industry all the time. We have an image of what a tester should be, and we try to push everyone into that image. And if you are one of those people, and I've been there, it is painfully, excruciatingly difficult to go to work every day and thrive in your career if you are trying to do something you're not designed to do. And the only way that you will thrive in your career is to find something you enjoy, to do it, experiment, and keep pushing those boundaries. And it's going to get really, really hard at times. Now, I enjoyed Tarek's talk yesterday because he said, why is he trying to publish all these different things to beat the other guy on the Google search to be number 1? Okay, it's a positive why. I like that. And for me, my why is my painted picture. When life gets tough, and it's hard and it's miserable sometimes, and the money's not coming in, or the work is difficult, the clients aren't there, or you're just not succeeding in what you're trying to do, you have to always come back to why. Now, who's read Simon Sinek's Start With Why? Interesting book. It's best to just watch the video. But essentially, what he's suggesting in an organization is we start at the wrong place. We start with the how and the what rather than the why. And it's the same with our own lives. We start with the how and the what. I've got to learn Python because that's what the market is demanding. But why are you doing it? To get a job? No, but why? Okay, what is it that you want from your life? Because once you discover the why and you encode it in something that you can come back to and go, that's why I'm doing this, you can succeed. So as you can see, part of my list is to try and lose weight and look like a beefcake weightlifter. I've got a garage with weights and everything, and I use it probably once every 6 months. And when I come back to the why, though, the why is really compelling. It's to be here. What's the purpose of life? To be alive. And taking health seriously is something I have to keep coming back to the why and going, why am I doing this? So I can see my kids grow up, so I can have a future that extends beyond the next few years, so that I can achieve the rest of the stuff on my list. And so I have to do exercise. For some people, they love exercise. It's just normal. For me, it's weird. So I have to keep coming back to why. So the best way to thrive in an organization is to step outside of your job role. If you ever hear anyone say, it's not in my job description, then please tell them that they are being ridiculous. So when building teams, we often label people, but as soon as we put a label around somebody, we define them, and therefore we confine them usually to that label. So I'm a tester, and I do this. I'm a developer, and I do this. I'm a scrum master, and I do this. I'm a product owner, and this is my job. But in most organizations, if you want to have a high-performing organization, you have to address the gaps that exist between those roles. Because in most organizations, that's where the problems are. whether they're communication problems, whether they're process problems. You don't improve a process by improving one part at a time. You look at the whole thing and you improve everything. And the only way you can do that is if you have people who go, you know what, there's a problem here between dev and test. I'm going to own that. And they own that problem rather than we just leave it. And the more that you individually own the problems, the broader your skill set gets. The more effective you can often become. And you will be forced to learn skills and knowledge and experience that no one else is doing. And therefore, you become far more valuable to the organization and to the market. It's incredibly difficult to write a job description for an effective employee because they just do so much good stuff. So I would encourage you to look at what your job description is, to look at what you do, and then to step outside and start doing bits of other stuff. And in a high-performing team, you find people doing this all the time. They don't care about labels. They are looking at the why. They are looking at what they are doing, and they are solving problems, whether they're in their area or not. So I would encourage you to step outside of your job role, and that way you can thrive in your career. And then finally, and I'm leaving some time for questions, fingers crossed there are some. Don't forget to get onto the slide do and add your questions, otherwise we'll declare victory and we get 15 minutes back, which is not a bad thing, really. Final point, if you want to thrive in your career, you must put your family first. So at the beginning of every single year, I sit down and I work out what I am going to be doing with my family, and I put it into my calendar first. And then everything else is built around my family, apart from this week where I forgot it was Halloween. And the kids are going trick-or-treating without me tonight, which will be, thankfully for me, that's great. I hate it. Horrible, isn't it? It's so dark. It's like, where are the kids? Are they my kids? Are they someone else's kids? Don't go to that house. I've got a pumpkin outside. You'll terrify them. It's not good. And then all the sweets. We've got buckets of sweets from last year still. Stop eating that stuff. It's horrible. Anyway, family first. And the other thing is what people say is, oh, yeah, but then I've got to work all these extra hours and all that sort of stuff. Of course, there are times when we have to work hours. And at the beginning of every week, I look at what's in the calendar, and I make it very clear to the organization that on Wednesday or Thursday or whatever, I am leaving at 4:30. But on Tuesday, I'm happy to stay till 7 or 8 to get this thing done. Family first. Because when and if things go wrong, your health suffers, anything, the people who care the most about you are your family, not the organization that you work for. And I see too many people losing entire decades of their life to an organization. And I'll ping you the notes afterwards. Clayton Christensen, I think his name is. You familiar? I think I got that right. And he, every year, would go back to his university alumni where they'd all come back together and they'd talk to each other and find out how they're going on. And what was remarkable was what he found was every year there were more and more people who were divorced. And there were more and more people that get back together and the kids wouldn't speak to them, or their family had just disowned them. But these people were super successful. They were running corporate organizations. They were the best of the best. And what was interesting was how we measure our lives is usually economic, status. It's normally driven by things that other people apply to us, labels. And it's the wrong measure. Surely the measure of our life is how much time we get to spend with the people that we love. And at the end of it, Clayton Christensen says, nobody set out from university to get divorced. That wasn't a goal, but it happens to so many people because the measures they're using are driving away the things that actually matter in life. So I would encourage you, if you're going to thrive in your career, there will be moments where you have to put business above family, but they should be moments. They shouldn't be decades. And so I'll leave you with that. Family first. So here are the 10 simple ideas to thrive in your career again. So number 1, decide to thrive. You have to make that decision Otherwise, 10 years, 20 years will pass and you will still be in the same situation you are in now. Relationships are critical to your success. Relationships are how the world goes by. You must be having fun in your career, otherwise, what is the point? Trade your freedoms wisely. Find organizations where your freedoms are not at odds. Otherwise, you'll go through your career finding it quite hard. Ship value. And value is always in someone else's head. So work out what that value is and help them deliver it. Embrace our differences. We are all different, thankfully. So work out what you're good at and embrace those differences. Learn why are you doing this, and then step outside of your job role, and throughout all of this, please put your family first. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And we have plenty of questions in the Slido, so please put that. Yeah. And the first one. Can you really change people's behavior? It seems to me that changing culture requires changing people. People equal to culture. What's your opinion on that?
Absolutely, you can change people's behavior. Well, you can encourage them to change their own behavior. You can never really change anyone else's behavior. But really, if you're a manager and you have somebody, let's say you have somebody who is exhibiting all of the wrong behaviors. So your job as a manager is to let them know that those behaviors are not acceptable and that you expect something different. And in our industry, we don't have managers who are strong enough. We don't have managers who are willing to have those difficult conversations. It is entirely possible to change people's behaviors and change their culture. One of the most obvious ways of doing it is to just remove the entire people who are there and bring in a whole new set of people who exhibit the behaviors you want by default. That's what a lot of agile transitions do. I think that's a sheer waste of human capital. But it is entirely possible to change people's behaviors. And all it is just feedback. If I'm doing something ridiculous and somebody says to me, can you stop doing it because it has this effect? I'll go, okay, cool. And I might then change my behaviors. It's not easy. It's very hard. But that's the role of leadership and management. And unfortunately, we don't do enough of it.
Thanks. The next question. Can you suggest a website as Strengths Finder? Maybe I know the answer.
Absolutely. If you just do a Google for Strengths Finder 2.0, you will find the website. It's a Gallup's website. Gallup are the people who do the employee engagement schemes and all those sorts of things. And on their website, you don't even have to buy the book. You can just buy the code and you can sit it, and it will give you your top 5 strengths.
Yeah, and you can join next tutorial of Rob, because we have spoken a lot about it on Monday. Next one. You talked about using role power as little as possible. What is your opinion on flat organization structures? Is that something that you can be applied in bigger companies?
So the whole flat organization structure is a bit of a weird one, because there are companies and people who claim that they have a flat organization structure, but they do not. So hierarchies will always form, and people will always become leaders. Leaders emerge. If you're a natural leader, you will emerge as a leader, even in a flat structure. The problem we have is that, is it the correct leader? And that's often where things go wrong. There's some really good case studies. If you look at any company that claims to be a meritocracy or any of these different types of things, and you look at the feedback that people give when they leave those organizations, they say it is like being back at school. Okay, the cool kids, you're fine. If you're a little bit odd, you'll get picked on and ignored. And if you're just aggressive and horrible, everyone will leave you alone. Organizations, by their definition, are very rarely flat, despite what people say. So my advice is to never throw the hierarchy away. The hierarchy is not the problem. It's the people in it that are the problem. So agile community particularly, we just throw away management. We don't need it. People will self-organize. People rarely self-organize. And if they do, it's rarely for the good of the business. And that's why I believe in hierarchy, but I do not believe in command and control, directive management. We believe in changing behaviors, setting big visions, allowing people to work on their strengths. And you will have an organization that appears flat, but behind the scenes, there is a hierarchy that is doing what it should do best, which is to delegate work down succession plan people through their careers, you get more done, and people thrive in their organizations.
Next question. Why do you think people stay at a workplace that is toxic for them? Why not move on?
Because there's some reason that keeps people attracted to that organization. It's one of those things. There must be something there, okay? And most people don't realize that actually it might be that the office is only half a mile from their house, or the salary's good, or if they keep their head down, they can continue with this thing on the side that they're doing. There is always a reason for somebody to remain in a toxic environment. Whether it's the right reason and whether it's a good reason, I can't answer that. That's in the head of the person who sat in that toxic environment. And you do see it, and it's painful, because some people are incredibly gifted, and they're just trapped in these horrible places. But when you speak to them, there's usually a fairly compelling reason why they are staying where they're staying. And also, let's not make it sound simple. Changing jobs, finding a different career is really hard, and it has to be done carefully. So that's possibly why people still stick around.
What goals did you define for the first year?
So the first year's goal was to do a keynote. So I wrote down, I want to do a keynote. I want to write a book. So I wrote a book, and I did a keynote in that first year. And there was little goals around certain cars. I like cars, so I was a bit materialistic, which were the goals that ended up getting shifted off the list, because actually it doesn't make any difference in life. But the goal for the first year, conference, writing a book, did both of those, which was good. And then the goals for the year after that, if you're interested, was find a different job, one where I'm not testing. That sounds awful to say at a testing event. I've been in the industry for 17, about 13 years as a tester. I just had enough. Okay, I'm a people person, so I ended up managing a team. So that's one of the other goals.
Are there any good resources, books you can recommend, or you just did the yes man kind of stuff?
Or you just did I don't know what that means, but books and resources. If you go to cultivatormanagement.com, there is a link right at the top that says books. Every time I read a book, I list it on there for people to read. So that's where I would suggest you go.
Why do you hate Python?
I love Python. It's great. I just can't do it. I got to about Hello World, and I was like, that's it. I've owned this. And I like Python. It's brilliant, actually. I'm just not very good at coding. That's just not what I'm good at. And I tried for years to do it, and it's just, I was banging my head against a problem that I didn't need to solve. When I realized I could hire people that really enjoyed Python and Java and C#, and they could do the stuff that I was trying to do, while I did the stuff that they didn't want to do, it all fell into place. So that's why.
What kind of self-management techniques could you suggest to use at work?
I'm not sure I understand the essence of that too much, but if you're at work, self-management techniques, if you did the comms workshop, communication is the key. So it's all about relationships. And one thing I didn't mention in the talk, but relationships are built one person at a time. You don't build a relationship with a team, you build it with individuals. So if you can get good at reading body language, if you can get good at being assertive or doing whatever it is that you're trying to do to become more confident, if you can get good at verbal, written, listening, all of the different comms, you will have a very bright future.
Do you mean first I have to find I love to do with my heart, and then search, create a workplace for it?
So this is the kind of thing, what am I here for? What's the purpose? And often the purpose is really not clear. You don't know what you're good at until you try doing something. And so my advice would be just to try as many things that interest you as possible and see which ones you enjoy. And then when you find something that's really grabbed hold of you and this is what you want to do, then you find an organization that will let you accelerate that and really use your strengths. And we don't see that enough, sadly, in our industry. But to know, you don't get born knowing what it is you're supposed to do. You find it, and as you find it, it will change. I used to love this, now I like that, okay? And that's fine.
What if a toxic job pays so much that no other happier roles can compete with it?
Stay in the toxic job if that's what floats your boat. I always say there's two sides. When we're recruiting, is every organization I've ever worked for, we've never had enough money to take salary totally off the table. Okay, we cannot have ever afforded to just double what everyone else in the industry is paying. And it's a ridiculous route to go down anyway for an organization. And so if you imagine a balanced set of scales, and on one side you've got financial, you've got salary, you've got pension, you've got life insurance, all the other stuff that organizations often give you. And on the other side, you have the culture. And salary very rarely in the long run ever beats culture. And what we've always managed to do is stack the cultural side, the learning, the people, the teams, the product, the methodology, the conferences, the training, everything on that side to outweigh the fact that we've never had enough money to compete with some of the big players in London. And that's always worked for us. Because at the heart of it, most people would trade a 10, 20% salary difference to work in an environment where they'll thrive. And that's the goal of management, is to make the problem so interesting in your organization that you attract the best people. And as long as you pay them a reasonable market rate, you'll do fine. But if you're getting paid so much that it's toxic and you're kind of happy with that, it's up to you. It's your life.
What do you think about those jobs which cannot be loved easily? No learning possibilities. You may be alone, and so on, but that job needs to be done anyways. How would you encourage your employee to love that job and be striving?
So if it's your permanent full-time job forever and it's horrible and miserable, I'm not going to try and encourage you to love that job. I'm going to find somebody that will actually love that job. But I have another talk that I do, the 10 Behaviours of Effective Employees. And what we see in the industry is people are refusing. In fact, there was a meme about this about 3 or 4 years ago. They're refusing to do bad work. But actually, all organizations have bad work. I'm not talking about immoral, illegal, dangerous work, of course not. But there's bad work, there's technical debt, there's legacy products, there's all of this stuff that people don't really enjoy. And if it's a temporary bit of bad work, what's the problem? We've got a big why, we know we need to head here, this is a reasonable request, we're just going to do it. And in that bad work is actually the difference between your organization being good and being excellent, because most people avoid the bad work. And if you have that, you have an organization that never addresses its real capabilities. So I would say if it's temporary, just push through. If it's more than temporary, you really need to find someone that enjoys that bad work. And trust me, there are people who really enjoy really bad work, in my view, and they love it. And they look at what I do and go, that's bad work, I hate it. Okay, we're all different. But don't build your career up based on bad work. I mean, that doesn't sound good.
Next one, what would you do if Mr. F. Furious was a well-respected influencer in your team?
So I have had team members that we call arrogant producers. And these people are so good at what they do, but it comes with a level of management nightmare that you have to try and get the balance. And sometimes the balance is just not worth it. We have a saying, nobody will ever bring down our team. So if we have somebody who is like Mr. Freaking Furious, who is arrogant, who is disruptive, who has behaviors that we don't like, we do the same as we would to anyone else. We give them feedback. We ask them to do better, to change, to do something different. And if that does not work out, that person will not be part of our organization. There is no individual who is bigger than the organization or the team. It's as simple as that. It sounds harsh, and it is harsh, but unfortunately in most organizations we just let this stuff fester. And you've seen in the news what happens when organizations let dysfunctional behavior continue because those people are just too good. They're not. Trust me. Being a good engineer is about testing or technical stuff, and then there's a whole load of other stuff like communication skills, the ability to get on well with people, all sorts of stuff. It isn't just about the technical part.
Next one. What is a good mixture of these personalities in an organization? What percentage DISC should a successful company have?
So there is no right answer to this at all. So it is depending upon what you're trying to do and what your organization's values and culture are. So some organizations are very aggressive, very determined. They're in markets where they need people who are just going to go, 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 task-focused. Some organizations are paying down the debts of bad management and they need a little bit of a softer people approach. There's no right answer. But what is important is if For example, we had a management team. There were 6 of us in the leadership management team. We all did the DISC profile. And we all then worked out how to talk to each other and what each of us preferred. And it helped us become a much better engineering team. And we did it for our staff. They all learned to talk to each other in different ways. It's all about adapting your communication to talk to other people, to build relationships. So there is no right or wrong answer. It's just whatever you're trying to do. But I will say I did a session with an organization where we had about 15 different Scrum teams. And all the Ds sat on one table, all the Is, the S's, and the C's. It was very S and C heavy, as you would expect in an engineering team. And when we asked each of the project teams to stand up, there was one project out of, I think it was 6, that was failing, and the other 5 were doing well. And this one had a customer client that expected blah, blah, blah. And we asked them to stand up, the people who were part of that team. And the only people that stood up were the S's and the C's. Okay? And that client needed to be told not to keep pushing in a certain way, or that's not in the contract. And unfortunately, the guys who were working with the team just did everything possible because they were more on the passive end of the spectrum. And immediately, the executives knew what happened. So they got somebody who was a very strong high D, very assertive, very task-focused, into there to work with the customer to set expectations. And it went reasonably well. So it depends what problem you're trying to solve.
The last question, it got a lot of votes, 20. It seems that it's interesting for everybody. So what do you think about home office? I'm also interested in. What is your opinion?
As in working in a home office? Or home, yeah. So it's cool, it's fine. If you can work from home and you can still build relationships and get stuff done, then you should do that. I work from home quite a lot, it's good. When you're at home, there's a few things. One is you are never really going to effectively build strong relationships, especially if you have never met the people you are communicating to. So one thing I always advise if you're working with remote teams is you get all those people together at least once so you can look each other in the eye, shake hands, get to know that person at the basic human level of an interaction. Then when you go remote, it should be reasonably okay. Use video conferencing. Make sure that when you work from home, you set strict guidelines on when you finish work, because it's super easy to just keep working into the evening, or just put the kids to bed and I'm just going to go and do a few more hours. No, you need to guard that family first. And working from home, obviously, you need all the technology, all the other stuff. Yeah, it's cool if you can do it. I'm not a fan of people working from home when they live near the office. And we used to have this quite a lot where people would just go home, because it does make communication harder, usually. Not always, but it usually does. And the key thing, if you are in an office and you have people who work from home or remote, the learning on how to build that team is on you. Because when you're in the office, you often forget to include people, or you have conversations that never get distributed. And the hardest thing we found is not the people working remote or at home, it's the people in the office that need the training and the learning. Other than that, go for it. Cool.
Okay, so I think that we can move, so we can close the questions. We have minimum 10 other questions, so it means that this is a very good discussion. But Rob will be here today. I think you will leave only afternoon. So
yes, I'm leaving 2 o'clock-ish, I think.
Okay, so till then, I think you can reach him. So thank you again, Rob. Thank you so much.